Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. Today, before getting to our topic, I would like to show you Asia. Now, I would also like to show you China. In the past 6 years, China's economy has grown by $4.4 trillion. That is larger than the whole economies of India, Russia, and Iran combined. China has initiated a gigantic project called the Belt and Road Initiative, where countries from around the world have joined in. Now this is India.
Many years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the RSS headquarters in Nagpur in India. And when I went there, I saw this massive map on the wall, which showed India, but no Pakistan and no Bangladesh. And I believe that's what's called Akhand Bharat. Undivided India in some circles, Hindu national circles. Is that what you want to see one day? India restored, undivided, Bangladesh, Pakistan gone from the map?
The RSS still believes that one day these parts which have for historical reasons separated only 60 years ago will again through popular goodwill come together and Akhand Bharat will be created.
Wow.
The RSS believes in that. As an RSS member, I also hold on to that view.
India, for reasons only known to itself, is trying to constantly compete with China, either if it's on the Doklam border and now even in infrastructural projects. But why is India only looking to compete and have disputes with its neighbors? To discuss this topic, we have with us today Adam Garrie, the director at Eurasia Future and a senior writer at The Duran, theduran.com. Welcome to our show, Adam Garrie. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you. It was a pleasure here. A pleasure being here.
Adam, let's start with the first question. Can you please summarize China's Belt and Road Initiative and tell us which countries it's developing and linking together? And tell our audience of the bigger picture of the whole project.
Well, the Belt and Road Initiative, otherwise known as One Belt, One Road, was announced initially in late 2013 in China. And the idea is to link land roads and maritime belts throughout the major trading centers of all of the continents in the Eastern Hemisphere, creating an essentially singular loop with many different inlets, if you will, where countries can more easily trade in products and other items in the 21st century. The project seeks to revolutionize the concept of free trade throughout the world, which previously had been dominated by Western financial schemes rather than any unified logistical scheme. So One Belt, One Road prioritizes the actual physicality of moving goods between countries rather than the Western model, which is far more focused on the streamlining of financial systems, which in reality tends to submerge Asian countries to a Western financial system that doesn't typically work to their benefit. By contrast, One Belt, One Road allows countries to maintain their political sovereignty. There's no strings attached. In that sense, it doesn't make any financial or monetary requirements upon them. Each deal in terms of cooperation is done on a case-by-case basis, with linkage and connectivity being the main things that China tends to encourage in this way. One can call it the anti-colonial and pro-Asian model of free trade, and this is pan-Asian, whether it's Eurasia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and of course it also goes into Africa, the Middle East, and into Southeastern and even Northeastern Europe via other corridors on the western part of this track. The only places that aren't on it are the Americas for now, although that may well change via the Pacific Maritime Belt. So the countries that are involved are many, and there could be many more involved in the future. Just some of the big ones. Russia and Pakistan, I would say, are the main ones in terms of countries that are bordering China. Other countries like Philippines are set to play a very big part in the project, and this has become even more apparent now that President Duterte has signed incredibly meaningful peace accords over the South China Sea with Beijing. Indonesia will be very important. Thailand and other Southeast Asian countries would be very important. Iran and Turkey are on the One Belt, One Road, as will be Iraq and Syria, which is why a peace process there is very important to China and its other economic partners. There's, of course, a route that will go around the Horn of Africa from Djibouti into the Red Sea, and this will eventually go into the East Med and through the Balkans. So those are the main roads, but there are many internal tributaries on both the belts and the roads in this project. It's frankly the most important project of its kind in modern history, and it takes its name from the ancient Silk Roads, which linked the western parts of Eurasia and Europe to East Asia. So it's really the modern day version of something that is incredibly prolific in terms of ancient history.
But Adam, why is India trying to compete with China? According to your article, India is trying to embarrassingly copy the Belt and Road project with one of its own dwarf projects.
Well, that's absolutely right. Under the current Indian government of Modi, there's an attitude in New Delhi which is incredibly hostile to its neighbors, especially its two largest neighbors, which are China and Pakistan, who are both cooperating very closely on their portion of the One Belt, One Road. India could be an important player in this as well. The whole idea of One Belt, One Road isn't to exclude one country or a group of countries at the expense of another. The whole idea is to connect countries so that each can play to their strengths and benefit from the strengths of others through connectivity. So the end of the equation in terms of One Belt, One Road trading initiatives is equality of purpose and equality of wealth and enrichment, because it allows every country to do that which they do best. Instead of adopting that attitude, India's taken on an idea that they can do it all themselves. And this simply isn't practical. India's, of course, a very large nation. It's showing some signs of economic recovery after the disaster following on from Modi's internal monetary reforms. But nevertheless, India seems hell-bent on turning China into a long-term enemy, even though China has reached out to India on a number of occasions, including just several weeks ago, saying that no doors from the Chinese perspective are shut in terms of including India into this multi-continental, multinational trading and partnership initiative. Instead, though, Modi is trying to outdo China. He's trying to circumvent them by making with new land roads going out from India into other states, and perhaps most importantly, linking India via maritime belts with other countries. Now, this is admirable as it would be in any country. There's nothing uniquely Indian about this at all, not least because in the 21st century context, these ideas really are Chinese inventions. The problem is India thinks that it can link itself to the world while disregarding and indeed trying to sabotage in many ways, some explicit, some less so, what its neighbor to the east, China, is doing. This is impractical, and not only does it try to essentially break up the unity of One Belt, One Road, and China and Pakistan have obviously found a solution to that through the incredibly important China-Pakistan economic corridor, but more importantly, it creates a political environment of competition and hostility which runs contrary to the ideas of One Belt, One Road, which are all about connectivity and cooperation. So what it all boils down to is poor economic sense from India, blind ambition, which never leads to a good conclusion in geopolitics, and a kind of arrogant attitude that is symptomatic of Modi and those around him, whereby India is the greatest nation in the world and all other nations must do what we say. The world doesn't work like that. It's frankly an attitude where a country that escaped colonial oppression is adopting some of the language and some of the tactics of neo-colonial oppressive states, when One Belt, One Road is all about giving all Asian countries their own legs to stand on to create their own wealth and prosperity for a better future. It's a contrast in attitudes that will have very real economic consequences, mostly for Indians themselves.
Adam, what is India's project where it's trying to compete with the Belt and Road Initiative, and why can't, according to you, it compete with the Silk Roads, the One Belt, One Road Initiative?
Well, there's several things that India has in mind, but the only thing which has reached a semi-complete stage is something that they call the North-South Transport Corridor. This essentially involves trade that would go from India through the Arabian Sea to the Chabahar port in Iran, then from there north into Azerbaijan, and beyond that into Russia, and from there it could go in several directions, either into Central Asia or west into let's say, the western ends of Eurasia, where Eurasia meets Europe. Now, by itself, it's not a bad idea, but without connectivity to the other sides of One Belt, One Road, it's incredibly limited. All trade corridors do serve an important function, but with a lot of goods coming from China and Southeast Asia in particular, this North-South corridor is cut off from all of this. It's also cut off from the incredible high amounts of trade that will go between Pakistan and China's Southeast Asian partners through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The port at Gwadar in Pakistan is going to play an incredibly important role in One Belt, One Road. Outside of the ports in China itself, it's the most important port thus far in the One Belt, One Road network, and I'm sure will be for some time. This port is a deep water port, unlike Chabahar, and it's ideally placed to receive things from shipments from all of Africa and indeed parts of the Middle East, and then route them by land or by sea to Southeast Asia, to the northern parts of Eurasia, ending in Russia, and of course on to China and East Asia. All of the things that India is trying to do are trying to essentially circumvent this, but the ultimate conclusion is that the route will be much more limited, because a trade route isn't only about facilitating connectivity between one, two, or three countries. It's about that, but it's also about facilitating the easy transport of needed goods between countries beyond those which are specifically connected in any transport corridor. India, by cutting itself off from China, by cutting itself off from Pakistan and Gwadar in particular, is going to be cut out of a lot of shipments of necessary items. In order for India to get that, it would either need to join up with One Belt, One Road and link its North-South transport corridor to One Belt, One Road, or otherwise it would just have to import them, let's call it the old-fashioned way, which is time-consuming and expensive, and it just defeats the entire purpose of this connectivity. So while the North-South corridor could be very important as an element, a tributary, if you will, of One Belt, One Road, by itself it has inbuilt limitations, whereas the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which starts in China and ends at Gwadar, is something that is fairly limitless because of the economic might of two large nations, China's Pacific connectivity and Pakistan's Indian Ocean connectivity. This fits into the win-win attitude, which has become one of the monikers, one of the phrases of the Xi Jinping leadership of China. China and Pakistan have found a way where both parties mutually benefit for their cooperation, and all those who play a role will proportionally benefit as well. The situation that India has come up with will, of course, benefit some of the states that are participating, but overall it will be limited, and Iran absolutely knows this, which is why, unlike India, Iran is very much a partner of China and very much wants to be part of One Belt, One Road, and it's one of the reasons, frankly, that discussions between Pakistani and Iranian officials at very high levels have actually produced quite a lot of progress for both sides. Both sides have a mutual interest in promoting One Belt, One Road, and both sides have an interest in seeing that India doesn't use the region to promote terrorism, as they've done in Balochistan for many years. Iran, even though it's a partner of India, it has a common enemy, and I think this will help Pakistan and Iran gain trust and a further partnership in security areas, which will then lead on to an expanded link between China, Pakistan, and Iran. ultimately Chabahar can function best if it works with Gwadar rather than tries to replace it. It simply cannot replace it because the access is less good. It's not a deep water port. It can't receive the kind of portion of goods, of ships coming in that Gwadar can, and because of that, it should really be seen as a terminus of Gwadar rather than a kind of competition. Now, Iran, I truly believe, is very much open to this concept. India, however, is not. India has many problems indeed with its relationship with Iran, not least the fact that as the United States is trying to essentially turn India into a large regional proxy of its own ambitions to stop One Belt, One Road from functioning, to stop Pakistan from having better relations with its neighbors, etc., they're trying to use the Iran question against India, even though on paper India is now some new kind of ally with the United States. Pakistan doesn't have these kinds of problems. Pakistan has become incredibly assertive when it comes to rightly criticizing the disastrous US policy in Afghanistan. And furthermore, Pakistan's good relations with China, which have built on many decades of cooperation, which have seen the highest levels ever, and new and increased, intensified relations between Islamabad and Moscow, is also seeing Russia as the major Eurasian player, now having in Pakistan a very important partner in South Asia. In this sense, Pakistan doesn't need to be worried about the threats that America will give all of the South Asian nations when it comes to Iran, where India might be in some sort of trouble. In fact, there's already been reports in the press in multiple countries that the Israeli regime leader Netanyahu is very upset that India continues to cooperate at some level with Iran. So while Modi is essentially like a juggler who's eventually going to lose grip of all the balls he's juggling, China and Pakistan are in a very consistent position that will essentially guarantee not only the safety but the long-term viability of their transport corridors. If anything, India will end up losing Iran if they make a kind of blackmail sort of deal to not do business with China and Pakistan. That's totally unreasonable. Iran knows it, and I think deep down India must know it too.
Adam, why does the Modi's government have such a rivalry mentality where it's just trying to compete with China's infrastructural projects while knowing that it can't? By trying to give the world an alternative route to the One Belt, One Road, what should Modi's government actually be focusing upon?
Well, to address the first part of your question first, Modi is doing internationally what he's done in terms of domestic politics in India. In India, he's turning things perilously close to what one could call an apartheid state. Muslims in India have never had it so bad since independence and the establishment of the modern Indian state. The BJP is a radical Hindu party, and this Hindutva ideology is not about national unity, regional unity, cooperation between regions, trying to balance the wealth distribution between regions. It's all about a narrative that somehow the Hindus are being oppressed by minorities within India and they need to strike back. This has resulted not only in an economic recession following on from his monetary reforms, but it's resulted in a lot of violence in India. And the reports of violence against minorities, against females, against many other groups in India should be taken incredibly seriously. It's not the way a country which seeks to progress in terms of its outlook should take. He's applied now, Modi that is, he's applied this attitude, this very insular, regressive attitude to foreign policy whereby it's us against others. There cannot be cooperation between Asian countries. There needs to be a rivalry. And he thinks that India should be the king in that equation, where everyone knows that China has attained a technically and numerically superior position over the decades because of very hard work to develop the country's modern industrial economy and a lot of investment, a lot of difficult decisions that have been executed with Chinese-like precision. India looks at that and thinks, I want to outdo China, even though the infrastructural development in India simply cannot catch up in time. Even if India was able to run as quickly as China, to use the metaphors of the tortoise and the hare, it would still be impossible to catch up because China is just so far ahead. Now, this isn't being said in an insulting way. These are just the statistics that anyone in government and in finance and concerned with trade issues needs to investigate. The Indians seem to be in denial about this, and there's an easy solution. The easy solution would be for India to join in with One Belt, One Road and see what India can contribute to China, what China can contribute to India. This would also necessitate at least some level of practical understanding with Pakistan, because if India was to agree to cooperate with China, it wouldn't help much if there was a roadblock set up by India to its neighbor to the west, Pakistan. So where the Chinese model of win-win economics and practical diplomacy could see the relations between India and Pakistan becoming more settled, we could see some sort of Shanghai Cooperation Organization initiative on Jammu and Kashmir. We could see so many positive things that people throughout the world want to see, but India's attitude, and particularly that of Modi himself, just prohibits this from happening. The attitude can be summed up as a zero-sum attitude, where whatever you have means it's something I've lost. And this attitude is just totally incompatible with the modern age of connectivity. We see, for example, Russia proposing a tripartite economic cooperation scheme between the Republic of Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and Russia itself. This is all about taking two countries with historic hostility, to say the least, and trying to bring them into a peaceful situation through the promise of mutually beneficial economic cooperation. There's no reason that the partnership that Vladimir Putin is working on between Russia, North Korea, and South Korea couldn't be in some way replicated between the very large nations of China, India, and Pakistan. There's an attitude problem, though, in India, and it goes right up to the government, it goes right through Indian media, and it's very unfortunate because I, for one, want to see more world peace. I want to see more of this win-win economic cooperation, but at the end of the day, the only country that will suffer from a zero-sum mentality is India, because India will ultimately lose out on this opportunity, and because of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, China can largely bypass India when it comes to East Asian to South Asian trade routes. So where Pakistan and China are both winners, India, by their own making, no one has done this to them, it's made itself something of a loser in this equation.
Adam, do you think that Modi's mentality and approach would benefit the region? What approach do you think India should be viewing the region from? Which lens should India be viewing the region from? And what obstacles do their present mindset bring to the region and India itself?
Well, as to what the Indians should be doing, they should look at the areas where China and India are in agreement, even though India doesn't think they are, but there are some areas where they are. And one of those areas is Myanmar. The Chinese have recently proposed a three-stage peace process for this Rohingya crisis in Rakhine state in Myanmar. The situation involves traditional Indian ally Bangladesh, it involves Myanmar, and it involves China. Now, Bangladesh has shown that even though it's a traditional friend of India, that it is embracing One Belt, One Road. They said we're tired of poverty and One Belt, One Road is the answer, and I welcome this, because it is an answer for every country in the wider Asian continent. Now, Myanmar is a situation where China has focused on stability. China absolutely wants to see a peaceful end to the crisis. They want to see refugees return home. They want to see the violence ending. And the ceasefire that's currently going on there is something that in many ways the Chinese attitude has helped to foment. The fact that Myanmar and Bangladesh are talking to each other about a safe repatriation and normalization of the legal status of refugees is a very positive thing. Now, Modi has ingratiated himself to the government in Myanmar in a colossal way. China went about their peace process with calm and dignity, where Modi sort of went to Myanmar several months ago to sell the Indian ideal, as defined by Modi, to Myanmar. Now, obviously, it's the Chinese peace process that the government went for. India didn't propose anything specifically in relation to a peace process, even though if you were to look at Indian media, you'd see that they're somehow taking credit for it and saying China stole their idea. It's a silly attitude. It's not the kind of maturity that's required for interconnectivity to work. But because India and China both support stability and territorial unity in Myanmar, there could be a potential for the two countries to work out a joint peace initiative where India would have some sort of mediating and observational role, and so would China. If you find one point of connectivity, one point of cooperation in geopolitics, you can usually find several others. Look at the rapprochement between Turkey and Russia since 2015. Those two countries have found areas of cooperation that began in the energy sector. Now that's created a knock-on effect where they're cooperating on security issues, they're cooperating on agricultural trade issues, on nuclear development issues, on educational and cultural exchange. So finding that single point of necessity which draws countries together for a mutual interest is a very helpful way to begin this. India, though, just has this attitude where they won't extend a hand when China's leaving the door open. In Myanmar, there's a door open for China and India to become partners. India's done nothing about it. China has said even recently that the door to One Belt, One Road isn't closed in respect of India, and India hasn't really changed its mind. India has this domestic attitude problem, this problem of religious extremism that is written on every line of literature that the BJP, the ruling main party, puts out. But it's also because the United States is encouraging India. The United States has recognized this attitude of Modi's, and they've seen that it is rife and open for exploitation. And they're doing that. They're encouraging him to engage in active military border disputes with China rather than engaging in diplomacy. They're encouraging him to be an obstacle to peace with Pakistan and settling a multitude of issues like Jammu and Kashmir. They're encouraging India to take a line where they will never even admit that they're causing terrorism in Baluchistan, which is something that's totally unacceptable by any standard. And the Indians have seen that if the US will back them up, which is what they think in their own point of view, that they can get away with whatever they want. As we've seen, though, in Myanmar, where the United States realizes that China's relationship with Myanmar is more practically important with India, the US has taken an anti-Myanmar position. So much for that friendship with India. It's a one-way street, as most friendships are with the United States, and this is something that any long-time followers of Pakistani politics will understand, that America is very happy to receive from so-called allies, but it's much less willing to give on equal and respectful terms. India is going to have to learn the hard way, and what many other countries in the world, including Pakistan, have learned. And Pakistan has amended this. They've gone in the absolute right directions politically. Nothing's perfect, but on the whole, the direction that Pakistan is going in terms of international relations, trade, and economic connectivity is following what I call the Chinese model about cooperation. It's not about becoming Sinophile, becoming Chinese, and the Chinese leadership have made that very clear. It's about adopting a model that gives countries more freedom, because it's the colonial mentality of the Western financial markets, of the United States in particular, and other European nations that seek to erode a country's independence and therefore its cultural autonomy and identity. China has the total opposite model. China is interested in results, and everything else can function freely according to its own will. India could benefit from this, especially because the US now has India in a vice grip of sorts. But it's this attitude problem, it's this tunnel vision problem where they've almost pseudo-scientifically justified an extremist position with all sorts of deceptions. And at the end of the day, the only people they're deceiving are their own, and the people in India will not become wealthier because of the BJP, and eventually they'll know this.
Adam, let's get to the last question. How do you see the future between India and China and their relationship between other countries, and also the future of the Belt and Road Initiative?
In the immediate term, it isn't very positive because of this attitude of the government and the governing party in India. However, there are some areas where necessity becomes the mother of pragmatism, to use a new spin on an old phrase. India's main problems are its monetary problems. Modi's reforms weren't the silver bullet that he thought they would be. They made a lot of things worse. They increased a lot of poverty. They increased specifically a lot of discontent among many working class people, many of the poor in India. A solution for this could be adopting an increased amount of gold trade, building up gold reserves, perhaps even tying a currency down to a metallic standard, whether it's bimetallic or some other equation. Now, Russia and China are cooperating very closely in order to establish a new standard of gold trading and new gold exchanges in Asia that would essentially rival those in Switzerland, Britain, and New York. Crucially, these wouldn't be based on speculation, but that would be based on physical ownership of gold. And so this is incredibly important for all countries that seek to gain monetary independence from the hegemony of the US dollar. China and Russia have really spearheaded this, and as part of the BRICS, India has, of course, been privy to many of these discussions. Ultimately, if India wants to expand its gold reserves, if it wants to be part of the new gold trading mechanism for Asia, it's going to have to cooperate with China. There's simply no way around it. India may at first use its historically good relations with Russia to do this, even though India's been doing a lot with the United States, which is on incredibly bad terms with Russia at the moment. It still maintains a healthy diplomatic relationship with Moscow in spite of some of the real and alleged scandals that have been in the media as of late. This could help India eventually move into an area where it could become more, let's not even use the word friendly yet, but let's say have and develop a more practical relationship with China. This would necessarily eventually accompany some sort of realism on the part of India in terms of its relations with Pakistan. I think the fact that earlier this year, both India and Pakistan joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, whose largest members are China and Russia, can be only positive for the long term in terms of a peaceful and harmonious relationship in the medium and long term future between East Asia and South Asia. That's the medium and long term. In the in the short term, India's attitude I don't see as allowing any progress. But again, India is going to miss out. The rest of the countries that are involved with One Belt, One Road on all sides of the corridors are going to absolutely benefit. And we're already seeing many of these benefits kick in, even though it's very, very early days still.
Thank you so much, Adam Garrie, for being on Tactical Talk. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure here.
This was Adam Garrie, the director of Eurasia Future and also a senior geopolitical analyst at The Duran, theduran.com. We were discussing why India is competing with China. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain. Take care and goodbye.